on the subject of Netanyahu, let me say this. He is not just an ordinary war criminal. He is one of the worst, one of the most heinous of war criminals in modern times. And it is not just people such as myself saying that. Many Israeli citizens also consider him to be a war criminal and a horrific war criminal.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jason Liosatos, and here I am again with my show Outside the Box. I've got a wonderful gentleman on my show this evening who's been on before. Thanks, Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos. Thanks for joining me again this evening.
Thank you ever so much, Jason, for having me back on. And I'm thoroughly looking forward to our discussion. One of the things I particularly respect about you is your open-mindedness. You might not agree with every word I speak, but you give me a platform. You listen attentively to what my submissions are. And for that, I am very grateful because, as we both know, in Western societies, at an official level, there is no open-minded approach to opinions which are dissenting from the official narrative. So again, thank you very much for being open-minded, and thank you very much for having me back on your show.
Thank you, Marcus. And you've done tremendous work over the years. You've stayed true to your well. Look, let's show your book first. Okay, wait, everybody. This is very important to show Marcus's book. And here we go. That's one of them. It is well, we'll show both of them while we're here. That's Whitehall in Stalin's Russia: British Assessments of the Red Army, 1934 to 45. I'll show the back of that book in a moment. But the first, I want to just show your other book. Can you see that? Okay, Marcus.
Yes, indeed. I can see that clearly. There's
the other one, Arise Russia and the Return of Russia to World Politics. Now, I'd like to remind people here of, well, okay, we'll talk about that in a moment, but I'll just show you the back of the cover because it's very, very important to show everybody this, because there's a retired American colonel's endorsing Marcus's book. And that's very important because there we go, Colonel U.S. Army retired Keith Donahue, and I won't read it, but you can all freeze that and read it yourselves. The in-depth analysis of the Anglo-Russian relationship during the 20th century provides exceptional insight into policy choices, not the only United Kingdom but other Western nations. And I'll leave that for a minute, but because if often people like ourselves, particularly people like yourself who are very, very well versed and very brilliantly knowledgeable about history, which I'm not, I've got a smattering of knowledge compared to you. You show everyone in the bigger picture, and that's what people need to know when they're seeing bombers raining down on Gaza, etc., and on Lebanon and in Ukraine and everything. It's just about kill Putin, you know, don't be anti-Semitic and all this kind of thing. I shouldn't, you know, joke about it, but you know, you're a historian, analyst. You know, Russia and the former Soviet, you know all about this stuff. So I want to open up. You can go to @Dr. Marcus P on Twitter. So let's start off with Israel. We've got to, haven't we? And then we'll go on to Ukraine. And we can unpick a few things here, but I want to first tell everybody, and I was just telling Marcus that I was assassinated, if you like, or crucified by George Monbiot and The Guardian, also the BBC the year before, and the Times newspaper also, for of course being anti-Semitic, because that's the torpedo they use. And that, my friends listening, is the shield that they've used with impunity for decades. And at last, Marcus, that shield is dissolving because more and more people are having the courage to say, you can't do what you like, Israel. You can't play the victim card all the time. You can't kill and maim and bomb people and children just because you're going to use the anti-Semitic shield to shut everybody up. So I've been shouting about this for ages, and it's very important. So at last, I've had someone from the IDF on my show, people can watch it, who said Israel allowed Hamas to come in. Why? Why? People have asked me. Because they wanted to do this for a long time. And sorry to keep going on here a minute. I want to unleash Marcus on you now, but it's very important to say this. I was in Cape Town. I married a black lady. I'm not with her now. I've seen horrific apartheid and murder and maiming and cruelty to black people. And in Gaza, it's worse because there's a fence with gates and they can't even get out. And they can't even swim out to sea to save their lives on a raft, right? So it's an apartheid genocide. And I got to get that off my chest. Sorry, Marcus, you know, and it's a prison for those poor souls. So, you know, most people don't even know the history of the area, Marcus. Where do you want to start with it, please? And you know, sorry for my rant, but I'm not sorry for my rant. No, it's a dreadful murder. Oh, one final thing, everybody. Sorry, Dr. Marcus. If those babies that are being shown to be killed and murdered and mutilated were white, there would be total uproar in this world about it. Think about that, everybody. Have a think about that, yeah? Anyway, where do you want to start, Marcus?
Let me first of all say, Jason, that there are always two sides to a story. Indeed, it is often the case that there are multiple sides to a story. Furthermore, no government, no country, no people is angelic. Russia is not an angel. Israel is not an angel. America is not an angel. Britain is not an angel, and so forth and so forth. What I have just said is irrefutably true, and yet we live today in a part of the world, namely the Western world, where Western governments and their allies, such as the Turkish government and the Israeli government, are presented as being angelic, are presented as being governments who can do no wrong, who are beacons of civilization. Well, that is simply preposterous nonsense. So, in regard to the current situation in West Asia, my first observation is as follows. The Israeli state, ever since 1948, has been persecuting, including murdering, Palestinian civilians, including women and children. But what is different is this. Since October of 2023, the Israeli military has been murdering Palestinian civilians in full view of the world, and they do not deny it. Before October of 2023, they were murdering Palestinian civilians, but they more or less did it in private, and they always denied it. Now, the change is quite remarkable. The mask has clearly come off. Now, I have spoken over the last year or so to very seasoned commentators of West Asia, and they are quite dumbfounded by the behavior of the Israelis, because it is not in the interests of Israel for them to be behaving how they are in full view of the world. It is certainly the case that it is putting a strain on Israel's strategic partnership with America and Israel's strategic partnership with Britain. The Western ruling elites do not care about Palestinian civilians being murdered, but they do care when this is happening in public. Why? Because it damages their facade that they are the defenders of human rights. They are the defenders of civilization. They are the defenders of mankind in the world. So that is why in private, the American and the British ruling elites will be saying to the Israelis, our support for you will continue to be unconditional, but your behavior in public is putting us under a spotlight. Now, let me just clarify something, Jason. Since October of 2023, I have appeared on numerous news channels, and I have said that whilst ordinary people in all four corners of the world are now aware of the true nature of the Israeli state, i.e., that it is a murderous one. Nonetheless, this will not deter the American and British ruling elites from continuing to provide them with unconditional support. There can be as many protests at universities as is imaginable, as is possible. Certain shops and companies in the Western world, in the world as a whole, can be boycotted, but this will have no impact whatsoever on the mindset of the Israeli ruling elite and the mindset of the Western ruling elites. Yes, as I said, it puts the British and the American ruling elites in a rather embarrassing situation, but then Israel is continuing to behave in a murderous way. So that is something we must be very aware of. We mustn't get excitable thinking that boycotting certain companies is going to put pressure on Washington and London, which will result in Washington and London putting pressure on Tel Aviv to cease its military operations in Gaza. That will never happen. So, my opinion is that Israel, since October of last year, is actively pursuing a greater Israel. I believe that Israel intends to capture the whole of Gaza, to expel either all or most of Gaza's inhabitants, the Palestinians.
One quick thing, sorry to jump in, Mark,
Yes.
because they've already said, sorry to jump in, we're going to shut the gates, or we're considering shutting the gates and starving everybody out. So if you want a chance to get out, everyone get out now, and what's left will be Hamas, and we'll starve them to death, right?
And then,
Go on, sorry.
if they achieve their goal, they will then formally annex Gaza. Now, to people in the Western world, such as in America and in Britain, who are influenced, indeed brainwashed by Western mainstream media in how it presents Israel, I would say two things. Firstly, Israel treated wounded Al-Qaeda fighters who had been injured in battle against the Syrian army when the war in Syria was raging. Indeed, Netanyahu publicly met with those wounded Al-Qaeda fighters in Israeli hospitals. After those fighters had recovered, the Israelis put them back into Syria to continue their onslaught against the Syrian people. Furthermore, isn't it telling, isn't it interesting that neither Al-Qaeda nor ISIS have ever threatened to militarily attack Israel? Indeed, they have never militarily attacked Israel. And some years ago, a former Mossad director said that Israel does not regard Al-Qaeda as an enemy because Al-Qaeda has never attacked Israel. Also, the Israeli state promotes open borders. That is something that people, for example, in Britain, are completely unaware of. So if the Israelis do expel most or all of the Palestinians from Gaza, where will those poor souls go to? Well, they will come to Western Europe, for example, Britain. Now, that is something that ordinary people in the Western world should be aware of. Israel does not fight Islamist terrorism. Israel is unofficially aligned with Islamist terrorism. Also, Israel and Saudi Arabia enjoy with each other an unofficial strategic partnership. And Saudi Arabia is one of the leading exporters of Islamist terrorism in the world. So, regrettably, how a substantial percentage of ordinary people in the Western world view Israel is through a Western prism. They know nothing about West Asia. Indeed, they know nothing about international affairs in general. So I really do urge people who are listening or watching this interview to not take my word for it. Take to the internet, carry out independent research, and you will see that Israel treated wounded Al-Qaeda fighters, that Al-Qaeda and ISIS have never militarily attacked Israel. They haven't even threatened to militarily attack Israel. And that a former Mossad director said Israel does not regard Al-Qaeda as an enemy. That is extremely important information. And how interesting is it that Western mainstream media will never report on that?
Well said, Marcus. And I've got to toss the question to you, because how many times have I heard people saying, and yes, they might be conspiracy fiction nuts, not all of them. They've said, well, America and Israel and the West created ISIS purposely. How about that? How much truth is in that, do you think?
Well, let us not forget, Jason, during the 1980s, when the Soviet army was engaged in a war with the Mujahideen, which included Osama bin Laden, Western powers, principally America and Britain, were providing political, economic, military, and intelligence assistance to the Mujahideen. During the Bosnian Civil War, the Americans, who were backing the Bosnian Muslim government, flew into Bosnia from Afghanistan Mujahideen, so that the Mujahideen could join forces with the Bosnian Muslim army to fight against the Bosnian Serb army. And one of the Mujahideen fighters who was flown into Bosnia and who was seen at the Holiday Inn Hotel in Sarajevo in 1994 was bin Laden himself. So to argue that there exists no relationship between the Western ruling elites and Islamist terrorist groups is not just tenuous, it is completely untenable, because there is concrete evidence which demonstrates the complete opposite.
And is it true that, and again, things I've heard, is it true that they flew the bin Laden family out of America just after 9/11, when, of course, it was bin Laden, right? Is there any truth in that, do you know?
I am very well aware of that accusation. I've been very well aware of the accusation for many years now. Is it true? I really don't know, Jason. I am one of those people, unlike for Western politicians and Western mainstream journalists, I do not have an opinion on every single matter in the world. One simply cannot have an opinion about everything. I form an opinion based on research and based on concrete evidence, evidence that a court of law, a legitimate court of law, would accept. So whilst that accusation is most interesting, I cannot confirm its veracity.
Thanks, Marcus. I'll just toss a couple of things in to give a little thing, you know. I recently saw a video of Netanyahu. What is that guy? I don't know what he is. You know, there's a lot of theories about what kind of character he is, but I recently saw him running through corridors like a terrified child because there was a drone attack and they tried to kill him. And it's like big shock and awe. They tried to kill Netanyahu, the head of the chosen people. How dare they? But it's okay for them to drop bomb. I mean, let me remind everybody, I was outside the American embassy with Tony Benn when the Iraq debacle was happening and they were saying they've got weapons of mass destruction. I was there with Tony Benn and in the student union, and we were called conspiracy theorists, right? And then it took all those years for that to come to fruition, that it was a lie, right? And all those millions of people they killed, it was a terrible lie and murder by the Western governments, and Tony Benn still, Tony Blair's and all lot still walking around. So what a thing to see him getting a taste of his own medicine. Suddenly, oh my God, he's being bombed. Is that possible that someone could actually try to kill him, the one that's killing all those people? And I was on RT years ago and I did a little talk called Kill 'Em Just In Case. They drop bombs on people. They don't care how many innocent civilians they kill, Marcus, as long as they might just kill one of those leaders of Hamas or leaders of Hezbollah. It's the most incredible thing. And I'll just toss this in as well. It's getting to the point, like you said, they're blatantly doing what they're doing now. The gloves are off. The curtain has come to one side like the Wizard of Oz. And it's so obvious what they're doing now. It's almost getting to the point, well, we're the chosen ones. We'll do whatever we like and no one can stop us, right? And I know I get a bit animated. I should calm down, but I am Greek. And almost like, what are you going to do about it then? You know, I mean, it's astonishing. And do you know what, is it true about the Samson option? I've heard they've got nuclear weapons pointed at every country in the world, because don't forget, no one's ever allowed to ask Israel what nuclear weapons it's got. How dare you? That's anti-Semitic. It's incredible, Marcus.
Well, let me take your last point. Israel does not have nuclear weapons which are aimed at every country in the world. Israel certainly does have nuclear weapons which can cover the whole of North Africa and the whole of the Middle East, or West Asia, to be more precise. But the Israeli nuclear arsenal is not like the Russian nuclear arsenal or the American nuclear arsenal. Israeli missiles, which can carry warheads, simply do not have the range that American missiles or Russian missiles have.
In other words, Marcus, they don't need them because America and the West, they're all in bed together, right?
Well, I have no doubt that if Netanyahu felt the need to use Israel's nuclear warheads, then he would use them. And on the subject of Netanyahu, let me say this. He is not just an ordinary war criminal. He is one of the worst, one of the most heinous of war criminals in modern times. And it is not just people such as myself saying that. Many Israeli citizens also consider him to be a war criminal and a horrific war criminal. What I find once again very telling is how Western mainstream media make virtually no mention of the fact that there are many Israelis who are opposed to Netanyahu's war in Gaza. Many Israeli citizens bitterly despise him. Many Israeli citizens regard him as one of the most corrupt of Israeli politicians in recent times. And yet, those Israeli citizens who have taken to the streets to protest have no one in the West to report on their opinions, on their dissenting opinions. How interesting is that? If British mainstream media, for example, was truly independent and free, then there would be articles run by the BBC or Sky News or Channel 4 News interviewing those many Israeli citizens who hold a very negative opinion of Netanyahu and his war in Gaza. And yet, if you go by what Western mainstream media says, you would be understandably mistaken for thinking that all Israeli citizens support Netanyahu and they all support his war in Gaza, which they don't. And remember, I am of the opinion, and I know other commentators are of the opinion, that one of the reasons he launched the invasion of Gaza, which means the invasion of Palestine, was to distract attention away from the court in Israel, which is investigating him for high-level corruption. He is an extremely corrupt politician. And I should have said earlier, and I will say it now, Jason, I believe there is another reason as to why the Israelis invaded Gaza, and it is this. In the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, there are very large reserves of oil and gas, which have only been discovered in, relatively speaking, recent years. Now, because Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, and Lebanon, to an extent, falls within the West's sphere of influence, the Western ruling elites have essentially taken control of those oil and gas reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. However, off the coast of Gaza, Palestine, there are also oil and gas reserves. So they are the only oil and gas reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea that the Western ruling elites do not control because it belongs to Palestine. But if the Israelis do annex Gaza, then the Western ruling elites will come to control those oil and gas reserves off the coast of Gaza through the Israelis. So there is also an economic dimension to the Israeli invasion of Gaza. And that is a dimension I have been flagging up ever since October of 2023 on television.
Well said, Marcus. Yes, you have. And I appreciate what you've done. And you're a very amazing mouthpiece for the truth. That's it, you know. And look, that way they closed RT Russia down a bit quick, didn't they? When things started kicking off. But and let's remind everybody, or I'll say it right now. I know I'm going to be a bit conspiracy theorist when I say this, but it's easier to say it now. They control the Western media, everybody. That's it. They do. Oh, I'm anti-Jewish. I'm anti-Semitic. No, I'm not. But they control the whole blooming mouthpiece of the media. It's obvious. So like Marcus said, they would be doing that. And I will play the tape now, when I drop it in a minute, of Netanyahu bragging that he controls Congress. And one of the things George Monbiot and The Guardian accused me of being a conspiracy fictionist was that I said many times that they're in bed together and they control Washington. He said, that's a conspiracy fiction, Jason. 2 weeks later, after I had the so-called interview stroke crucifixion with Dear George, out came the video circulating. It was beautiful for me. of Netanyahu bragging that he controls Washington. And I'll drop it right in here now. And I've also heard that they wanted to build a canal through there. I don't know what truth is in that, you know, a new canal going right through up that way, and they had to get rid of the thousands to do that. I don't know if how much truth is in that, you know. But what kind of I mean, I want to go on to other things with you, Marcus, because you're a wealth of knowledge. What kind of pantomime is it? And where's it heading? You know, people have asked me many times, are they all in it together? Is it one big giant facade? You know, what kind of pantomime is this? You know, there's no borders from space, as I've said many times, as people are being killed and slaughtered. We're one big, giant, beautiful family. We've been taught that we've all got borders, but we're a family. We're all killing each other. And I've painted pictures, as you know, I'm an artist, of soldiers crying and that, you know. And I've said, stop fighting for these monsters and psychopaths and maniacs who would never have the courage to fight on the front line themselves. They use you as cannon fodder. You're killing your brothers and sisters of all types of colours. But they're brainwashed. They're conditioned in schools when they're in Israel to hate brown people and Palestinians like they're filth, just like Cape Town. Same thing with the Afrikaans people. And you know, I don't know what do you want? Do you want to put your final thing on that? You know,
well, this is something where we may have a different opinion.
Right. You know more about me, that's for sure. You're a historian.
Is Israel in America's pocket, or is America in Israel's pocket?
Right.
What is abundantly clear is that the Israel lobby in Washington is exceedingly powerful and is exceedingly influential. Because
let me remind, sorry, Marcus, I'm very sorry to jump in, but I've got to remind everybody, and it's obvious, but every single president that gets in is in the pocket of Israel, right? Because I asked someone the other day, well, even Trump, not even Trump, because I've never said Trump's going to save us, right? But even he's kissing the wall and wearing these hats. So, yeah, if you don't do that, you don't. Sorry, Marcus, go on.
Well, indeed, one American politician who is now attempting to expose the very, very dangerous level that the Israel lobby has over Congress and the American government is Thomas Massie of Kentucky. And I would urge people to look into the work of Thomas Massie that he is undertaking on this matter. But all that said, Jason, I am still of the opinion that Israel is in America's pocket. And I will cite one argument in favor of that. If America was in Israel's pocket, then America would have gone to war with Iran by now. The Israelis are clearly attempting, through their actions in Lebanon, are clearly attempting to provoke Iran into taking military action, concerted military action against Israel, which would then compel America to come to Israel's aid. So, in simple English, I would argue that the Israelis are trying to incite a war between America and Iran. And the Americans clearly are not falling into the trap of the Israelis. The Americans and the Iranians naturally despise each other, but they do talk to each other, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly through a third-party mediator. And it is very clear this year, indeed the Iranians have said so, the Americans have said so, that they have spoken with each other about how to diffuse the tension in West Asia, which is on account of Israel. Would the Americans like to see the overthrow of the Iranian government and the destruction of the Iranian revolution and the imposition in Tehran of a compliant, pro-Western government. Of course, the Americans would like that. If there was an opportunity, they would support that. But that is very different to the Americans going to war with Iran. The Americans understand that if they went to war with Iran, the whole of West Asia would go up in a gigantic fireball. American interests in the Middle East would be devastated. Yes, the American military, being a superpower, would eventually defeat the Iranian military. That's no disgrace to the Iranian military. The Iranian military is very well led, very well trained, very well motivated, very well equipped, and very powerful overall. But it can't defeat the American military. Nonetheless, the damage which the American military and American economic interests would incur in a war with Iran would be disastrous for America. So the Americans will not allow the Israelis to drag them into a war with Iran. So, Jason, that is just one argument I would make to say that whilst the Israel lobby wields enormous influence in American politics, in the American government, I still believe that Israel is in America's pocket, because if it wasn't, as I said, if America was in Israel's pocket, then there would have been a war by now between America and Israel and Iran. My apologies.
Yeah. Wow. It's a huge subject. I could dig deeper and deeper up, but I know we've got limited time here. But I could like dig into this, and it's such a huge thing. This whole thing about that region is just incredible, you know. And it saddens me, Marcus. You know, we're all, you know, like I said, from space, there's no borders. You know, why are people fighting and killing each other? It's a disgrace. It's like a big, giant casino monopoly game that's gone mad, and people just seem not to care how many people die for power, profits, short-term greed, slavery, debt, and you know. I was hearing you talking earlier on. In fact, I was listening again because I've heard you before, obviously talking about the inversions, you know, and about the British, about what governments hate their people. You know, before I go on to you know, obviously Ukraine, I'm going to ask you before we go about Ukraine, but you were talking about how the British people don't care about their people, because most people, you see, think that the government cares about them. They're like little children looking for someone to tell them what to do. They've got Stockholm syndrome for a start off, and it's that they care about us, the government. And I've heard from good sources that they just actually, not only they don't care about you, they laugh behind your back because you're so stupid and you're so subservient and you still believe the trick.
Well, I'm very happy, Jason, that you bring this matter up. The Western world, be it America, be it Britain, or be it Canada, is not a democracy. The Western world is a tyranny and a kleptocracy. Tyranny comes in many shapes and forms. North Korea is a tyranny. Yes, North Korea has a right to self-defense. And whilst I don't want to see nuclear weapons in existence in the world, nuclear weapons have kept the peace. There will not be a war between America and Russia over Ukraine or over West Asia, because what I call the elite of the elite in America and in Russia, people who you will never see on television, people whose names you will never know of, their task, ever since the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, their task has been to ensure peace between America and Russia. And on both sides, those Americans and those Russians are heroes. And we should be grateful. We should thank God for them. I'm not talking about Biden. I'm not talking about Putin. I'm talking about people you will never know. They talk to each other on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. In short, they talk to each other 24/7. Now, I've digressed. I understand why North Korea has developed nuclear weapons. It saddens me, but it protects them from American aggression. But North Korea is a tyranny. But I would say a stupid tyranny, because it's openly a tyranny, though the North Koreans do openly say that they are a one-party state. However, if we take Britain, for example, Britain is a tyranny, but my word, it is the smartest tyranny in the world. The British ruling elite, and I mean the heart of the British ruling elite, not the useful idiots in politics, not the useful idiots in journalism or in academia. No, they are just that, useful idiots. The heart of the British ruling elite is the most intelligent, the most cunning, the most devious in the world. After all, they have been in power since 1066, which is coming up to 1,000 years. So the Western ruling elites hate the people whom they rule, not govern, whom they rule. I will cite just one example of that. The Western ruling elites, be it the ones in America, the ones in Canada, the ones in Britain, have systematically destroyed the British national identity, the American national identity, the Canadian national identity, the cultural and spiritual values of the British people, of the American people, and of the Canadian people. And when I say the British people, I mean the British people. There are 4 nations which comprise the British people: the English, the Scottish, the Welsh, and the Northern Irish. They have systematically destroyed the cultural and spiritual values of many nations in the Western world. And they have done that in large measure by bringing immigrants from outside of the Western world into the Western world to destroy the Western world from within. Now, let me turn to Iran. In Iran, there is anything up to 6 million Afghan immigrants. I believe the official figure is either 3 or 4 million, but it is believed by many Iranians that there are some 6 million Afghan immigrants in Iran. Now, I have said this before on Arab news channels and indeed on Persian news channels, and this has been received with great interest. The Americans and the British never left Afghanistan. The Americans may have pulled their military out of Afghanistan, but it doesn't mean that they do not have any influence in Afghanistan. The Americans can control a country without having boots on the ground, so to speak. They can control a country through controlling the civil service. The civil service is more important than politicians. The civil service runs a country on a daily basis. So the Americans and the British never left Afghanistan. Now, why do I bring this up, Jason? Because I am of the firm opinion that the Western ruling elites, in order to weaken Iran by weakening the Iranian national identity, have flooded Iran with Afghan immigrants. And the Iranian people are not happy one bit whatsoever with the presence in Iran of so many Afghan immigrants. Now, those Iranians who live in Britain or in America and who are anti the Iranian government, and by the way, they are entitled to their opinion. They can be anti the Iranian revolution. They can be anti-Iranian government. That is their opinion. But listen to this, Jason. Those Iranians who are living in the Western world are saying that all of the Afghans who are now in Iran should be given Iranian citizenship, and that the Iranian government is discriminating against those Afghan immigrants. Well, isn't that powerful evidence to corroborate my assertion that the Western ruling elites try to destroy nations by flooding countries with immigrants? Because after all, what better way to destroy a nation than flooding that country with immigrants? Because if you destroy a people's national identity, if you destroy their culture, if you destroy their religion, then they have nothing to identify with. You can do as you please with those people. So the Western world is a tyranny and is a kleptocracy. The Western ruling elites hate the nations, the peoples whom they rule. They use immigrants from outside of the Western world to destroy the nations they rule, so that those people whom they rule cannot identify with anything. If you cannot identify with anything, you are easy prey. You are easy meat. And the Iranians are now starting to understand who is behind the driving of Afghan immigrants into Iran. And also, I've said this on Arab television, if the Western ruling elites achieve their agenda by 2030, which is to destroy Western civilization, and when I talk of Western civilization, Jason, I'm sure you know what I'm referring to. I'm referring to the civilization which has been passed down to us by the ancient Greeks, the greatest civilization in human history. I'm not talking about those useful idiots in London or Washington or Berlin or Paris who talk about their civilization. No, I'm talking about Western civilization that was created by ordinary Greeks, ordinary Romans, ordinary Britons. So if the Western ruling elites destroy Western civilization by 2030, I have argued to Arab audiences that they will flood the Middle East with immigrants, because whilst they dominate West Asia, they are very well aware that the ordinary Arab, largely speaking, does not like the West, does not like the Western ruling elites. So what better way to neutralize that opposition than flooding the Middle East with immigrants?
Oh, marvelous. I'm glad you touched on that. I was gonna go to Ukraine next, but I know we haven't got that much time. But it is amazing what we're seeing now. But you're saying about Agenda 2030 and all the rest of that, and I've had many guests on the show chatting about that. And again, I forget so much that I've been told, but absolutely, and they're doing it in so many ways. They're destroying the religions. Now, I'm not saying, fanatical religion can be a problem, obviously, because I'll kill you if you don't like my religion and all the rest of it. But that's what they're doing. You're right. They're neutralizing that. They're spiritually assassinating people, and they want people so subservient, helpless. Look at the 15-minute cities. I know it's a big subject, but all that kind of thing, digital slavery, cashless slavery, everything. So if you go against them, they'll just simply shut your bank account down. The transgender thing, Marcus, the transgender thing. I was also assassinated for saying you mustn't go into schools and teach kids that they can decide what gender they are and things like that. That's part of it as well. They want to take. Go on.
Allow me to say this. You bring up religion. What is at the heart of the identity of the peoples of the Western world? What is at the heart of Western civilization? Christianity. That is the fundamental pillar of Western civilization. And how interesting is it that Christianity is being brutally assaulted? The opening games of the Paris Olympics saw a horrific mockery of Christianity, specifically a mockery of the Last Supper. Was there a condemnation of that by the so-called defender of the faith in Britain, namely Charles III? No. Was there a condemnation of that mockery by the Archbishop of Canterbury, namely Welby? No. Was there a condemnation of that mockery by the puppet Starmer? No. The Western ruling elites hate Christianity. In fact, they hate all other religions, but they do understand that Christianity stands in their way because it is at the heart of the Western identity. Whether you are Orthodox, a Catholic, Orthodox or Protestant, it is at the heart of the Western identity, and it is the largest religion in the world. So in order for the Western ruling elites to achieve their diabolical agenda, and I used the word diabolical in a biblical sense.
I'll add satanic to that. Satanic.
Absolutely. They have to destroy Christianity. Now, consider this. This would never have happened. The Western ruling elites control every institution in the Western world. They control every facet of life in the Western world, not just the economy, not just education, not just media, but charities, NGOs, sports. So they were behind the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics. Now, hypothetically speaking, this would never happen. But if, let's say, Hinduism, or Sikhism, or Buddhism, or Judaism, or whatnot, had been mocked in the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics, you wouldn't have heard the end of it.
No.
The puppet Starmer would have issued a most damning condemnation of it. The so-called defender of the faith, Charles III, would have bitterly condemned it. Welby would have bitterly condemned it. So people must understand, and I believe the vast majority of people in Britain and in America are now aware. They have now woken up, and the waking up is as a result of the COVID catalyst. But they are aware that Christianity is under a brutal, horrific assault. But you know, Jason, I'm a Christian. I can't call myself a religious man because I don't go to church. Indeed, what churches can I go to in Britain? The Church of England is hardly a Christian. It's hardly a Christian church.
Well, that'll be a Wetherspoon soon.
But you know what? Despite all of that, I'm a Christian, and I believe, firmly believe, that good will defeat evil, that Christianity will defeat the Western ruling elites, and Christianity will save the world from the Western ruling elites. And I do believe the day will come, Jason, when continental Europe will be free, when the British people will be free, when the Canadian people will be free, the American people will be free, the Australian people will be free, and the New Zealanders will be free. Christianity will save the world. And I have Muslim friends and acquaintances in the Middle East, and I've said that to them, and they have all said, yes, without Christianity, we are doomed. Because if Christianity is destroyed in the Western world, that will mean the peoples of the Western world have been destroyed. They will become slaves, and there will be nothing to stop the Western ruling elite. the peoples of the Middle East will not be able to stand up to them. So, yes, the situation is diabolical. It is extremely disturbing. I think many people in Britain, for example, have become mentally affected by what is happening in British society, the attacks on the indigenous people of Britain. But many British people have either returned to Christianity or they have found Christianity. So we must keep on fighting. And I say this, Jason, I would rather be dead and free as opposed to alive and a slave. We must keep on battling and battling and battling. We must keep on expressing our opinions in an intelligent and respectful manner. We must keep on exposing the nature of the Western ruling elites. We must expose them to the peoples of the Western world and all the other peoples of the world for who they are. And they are murderers. They are psychopathic killers.
Well said. Bravo. I'm so glad you talked about that, because it is a spiritual battle, everybody. Believe me, and they do want to do away with it. Like Marcus said, just look, I'll just expound a bit on myself. Like, I can't help it because I'm passionate about it, right? I'm Greek, for God's sake. But not only passionate, very concerned, because like you said, that thing about the Last Supper and things like that. Now, people would say, get over it, the Last Supper. That was ages ago. Who cares about Jesus Christ? Blah, 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 blah. The young kids coming forward. But listen, everybody, I used to do conferences about the satanic abuse of children and child sex trafficking right here in Totnes in the Dartington Great Hall, right? People said to me, I can't face that, Jason. It's too much. Well, will you face it when it's your children being abused? Often by politicians, right? And I say to those people, it happens because you can't face it, which gives evil carte blanche. And it's just like what the governments are doing worldwide. It gives them carte blanche if people can't face it because it's so horrible, right? But that is absolutely right. Thank you, Marcus, for saying that, because I'll use the word Christianity, and I'll also say what that really means. It's being in touch with your ethical and moral alarm bell. The Bible talks about it. Christianity talks about it. Other obviously cultures talking about it. Because once you get rid of that ethical and moral alarm bell inside yourself and inside humanity, it's finished. And it shows how debased it already is by the way we don't shout about what the government's doing. It's becoming more and more normal to kill people, maim people, lie to people. If our ethical and moral alarm bell was in its true pristine form, we wouldn't need dustbins, policemen, or the army, let alone politicians, right? It's the most fundamental, beautiful thing ever.
And
treat
the Bible...
treat other people like you like to be treated. And if everyone did that... Go on, sorry, Marcus.
No, not at all. Very quickly, the Bible says in various passages that Satan will attempt to destroy God's kingdom from within. And let me cite one example. The BBC in recent years has run a number of articles normalizing Satanism.
Right.
The title of one such article is, "If you think you know about Satanism, think again." Well, people don't have to take my word for it. Take to the internet, type in BBC News, Satanism, the articles will come up. So clearly, Satanism is being normalized. And the greatest achievement of the devil is having convinced so many people that he does not exist. If you do not believe there is the devil, then you do not believe that there is God. If you don't believe that hell exists, then you don't believe heaven exists. And that accounts for why Western societies have broken down, because people are not fearful of God. They are not fearful of going to hell. And let me clarify a point. It is a falsehood that many so-called priests in the Western world, fake priests, say when they argue that God and Jesus would never allow anyone to go to hell. That is a lie. You read the Bible clearly, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and it unequivocally says there is a heaven and there is a hell. And yes, God and Jesus will send people to hell. So when you hear a priest, whatever church he belongs to, whenever you hear a priest saying that there is no such thing as a hell, that is a fake priest. That is not a Christian, a true Christian. People are in the Western world are treating one another horrifically because they don't believe there will be any punishment for them after they leave this world. Britain was once one of the most pious of countries in the world. Just walk down your road and count the amount of churches you will see. Yet, British society is dead. Britain is dead. There is nothing remotely British about this island which we live on, Jason, and that is because Christianity has been murdered.
Well said, Mark.
And British society is dead. Look at how so many British people treat each other because they do not believe in God. They're not fearful. They think this is how they see life, Jason. Well, I don't have long, 60, 70, 80 years. I'll do whatever I want to whoever I want. I'll enjoy myself. To hell with everyone else, excuse the pun, and I'm going to be happy. But they are mistaken, because when they leave this life, they will go before God and they will be judged, and millions of souls will go to hell. It won't just be members of Europe's royal families and members of Europe's aristocracies and the likes of Blair and Obama and Gates and Biden and Harris and whatnot go into hell. There will be ordinary people go into hell for what they have done, because they are complicit in the destruction of Christianity in the Western world. They are not insane people. They can think for themselves. They can think critically, but they don't. They have succumbed to temptation, the temptation presented before their eyes of the Western ruling elites. So, yes, there is a heaven. Yes, there is a hell. The Bible, in both parts, the Old Testament and the New Testament, clearly says God and Jesus will send people to hell. So let that, I suppose, be my final word in this interview.
Well, Marcus, let me just elaborate on that just slightly, because I feel it's important to just mirror what you said, really, right? In my own little Greek ranty way, right? There's a thing placed in everybody. You say there's no such thing as God and Jesus, and there's no such thing as being a good person. In every single human that's watching this, and globally, worldwide, when you come out of a mother's womb, there's a ethical alarm bell inside you. It's called your conscience. And it's really strong. It tells you what's right and wrong, right? Now, it gets dissolved over time. Why? Because you see it not being in existence. And the government, who you're supposed to be, they're supposed to be our mentors and people we look up to, they've got no conscience. They do anything they want. They kill and murder and maim and lie. So what chance do people have if they're looking at that? And then they see men beating women up in the boxing matches in the Olympics. And everyone is scared to stand up and say, what the hell's going on? Because their conscience is screaming, but they're scared of criticism to say anything about it. Just like the anti-Semitic thing, right? There's a conscience in everybody, and the truth is we're already in hell here, and it's become normal. Hell has become normal, and I absolutely resonate with what you say. My conscience is in a good form. I help people whenever I can. One final thing I said to George Monbiot in our so-called interview, I said, George, You know, if you ask people in town what I do, and I never tell people this, Marcus, and I wouldn't say it on this program unless we had brought this subject up. I said, if people told you I'm giving people money, I give people food. A pregnant woman came in my shop crying. She had nowhere to stay. My last money I used to put her in Dartington Great Hall for 3 days to have a bath and gather her senses. I gives people the shirt off my back, right? That's a conscience. That's being a good person. Not because I want people to know about it, because I wouldn't normally tell anyone. That's a conscience that's placed in each human being to be good to each other and be kind to each other. And the government wants that gone. You know, but anyway, we won't go on to Ukraine because we haven't got time, Marcus, right? But all I want to say before I go is thank you so much for being you and for talking about these issues. And I'm glad we ended on that, because let's remind people of one more thing. That guy who voted for Starmer, right? He let Jimmy Savile, the paedophile who was having sex with children, and he knew he was, I believe this is true, Marcus, he let him off the hook because he was in charge of whatever it was called then. Look it up, yeah? He let a paedophile off the hook. And there's much more to be said on that. So our governments are satanic, psychopathic, often paedophiles. And the quicker we will look at that, the better. But we've got to turn inward. What would you say, Marcus, before you go, your final word, right? What would you say to people if they say, what can we do other than keep exposing them? What can we do to turn this dreadful satanic pantomime around? What can we do?
Think independently, think critically, carry out your own research. After all, every household in the Western world, practically, I suppose, every household in the Western world has the internet. Go out, spread the word, engage people in meaningful discussions. Always be respectful. Always speak and write intelligently. Always corroborate your assertions with empirically based evidence. And always be law-abiding. Always be peaceful. Never use violence, because violence, first of all, is wrong. Secondly, violence plays into the hands of the Western ruling elites, because if violence is used, that will serve them with the pretext to introduce more laws which will curtail freedom of speech and freedom of protest even further. What really frightens the Western ruling elites is mass peaceful protests. That frightens them. That terrifies them. I mean, 100,000 people protesting, 200,000 people protesting. So all is not lost. Yes, the evil could have been halted 20, 25 years ago. I wasn't on television 25 years ago. I was at university, but I was speaking more or less the same as I speak today and have done for some 20 years now. But people weren't receptive. People weren't interested. But things have changed. Millions, hundreds of millions of people in the Western world have now woken up. So, as I said, keep on discussing, keep on engaging, keep on using peaceful methods to expose the evil nature of the Western ruling elites or globalists, however you wish to describe the men and women who rule the Western world. This is a war which has been brought to the ordinary man and woman. This is a war which has been brought to mankind. We cannot surrender. We cannot submit. We cannot capitulate. We must fight peacefully, legally, intelligently, and ensure that our faith in God, in Christianity, is rock solid. And through doing that, we will win. Yes, things will get worse in the Western world in the next few years, undoubtedly, but we will win in the end. History shows us that eventually good triumphs over evil. And the Western ruling elites are not invincible. They can be defeated. Britain can be liberated. America can be liberated. Greece can be liberated. Cyprus can be liberated. Germany can be liberated, and so on and so on. As I said, one of my mottos is, I would rather be dead and free rather than alive and a slave.
Thanks, Marcus. Well, that's it. What can I say? I really appreciate your time here. I thank you for all the work you've done, not just recently, but all for many years on all those channels I've seen you. And thank you for standing up, and thank you for your conscience and your moral and ethical barometer, and helping other people remind them to tap back into that, or we're doomed. So thank you, Dr. Papadopoulos. Really appreciate your work. And thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Jason, for the opportunity.
And I'll have my 5-minute rant now. So I always enjoy that at the end. All the best, Marcus. Thank you so much. Wow. There goes Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos. And honestly, go and see his work.